This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk Live. I'm your host, Rob Port. So, term limits. We've been talking about them quite a bit on the show, and that's for obvious reasons. There's a constitutional amendment, a proposed constitutional amendment that is being pushed in the state of North Dakota to implement term limits. Now, just to lay out specifically, because term limits are a broad idea. I think everybody understands what they are. It's a limit on the number of times a person can be elected to a specific office. We have them for the president of the United States. That president can only be elected to 2 terms, no more than 8 years. Well, I shouldn't say no more than 8 years. It is possible to serve more than 8 years. You just can't be elected to more than 2 terms. Teddy Roosevelt, as a matter of fact, could have served more than 8 years. Although I think the limit on term limits didn't exist when Teddy was getting elected, actually, now that I think about it. Anyway, I'm way off topic. What's being proposed specifically for the state of North Dakota is a term limit for the governor. Couldn't be elected to any more than 2 terms. Also, a term limit for the state House and Senate, the state legislature. Couldn't serve more than 8 years. Now, those 8 years, it wouldn't matter if maybe you got elected 2 years into another person's term. It's 8 cumulative years. So if you got appointed or got elected in a special election or something to fill a term that wasn't filled, and so you served 2 years of an unexpired term, and then you got elected to your own term for 4 years, you couldn't run for a third term because that would put you over the 8 cumulative years that this limits. Now, one thing you could do is if you served 8 years in the House, you could then run for the state Senate and serve another 8 years there. This is not retroactive. Several of the lawmakers who are sponsoring this have already served more than 8 years in the legislature. Make of that what you will. And the other thing it required, well, there was another part. What am I missing? That's all of it. I think that's all of it. I'll look it up. I'm going to bring on my guest. Well, I'm going to switch to the right screen is what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to bring on our guest, former Governor Ed Schafer, who at one point agreed with me and didn't like term limits. But Ed, the last time we talked about this, you said you've actually come around to the idea. So what do you make of this proposal in North Dakota to go to term limits?
Well, it's an interesting proposal, Rob. And by the way, great to be with you, and hello to all your listeners out there on Plain Talk. It's fun to be with you again and discuss these issues. Now, I've always believed that term limits were at the ballot box. If somebody isn't doing a good job, you vote them out or vote them in or do whatever the case may be. But really, the people speaking should be our term limits for our elected offices. But we've had this discussion and things that are going on. As you know, you mentioned the presidential situation where you can serve 2 terms. But most governors actually have 2 4-year terms, except for Virginia, I think, has 1 6-year term. So it's something that is certainly in our system. It's something that is in place. The thing that I've become concerned about and why I've kind of shifted toward term limits is the money in the system. The money in the system is bothering me. And in a legislative race in North Dakota used to cost $3,000, $5,000 if you were a local business person or a teacher or somebody that thought you had something to contribute to public service. You could raise the money, tap your relatives, tap into your bank account. You could raise the money to run for office. Today, those races cost $50,000. $70,000. Some of those races cost Rob $100,000 and more for a part-time legislative seat in North Dakota. That's crazy to me. I mean, that just seems impossible. And what happens is my mind goes to the only reason someone would contribute that kind of money is a special interest group. I want a specific thing out of a legislator. They're aligned with me on certain points. And so I'm going to put some money in. And the only way that money is going to be effective is over the long term. A freshman legislator doesn't have much ability to get legislative passed. They can vote for it, of course, but they don't have much ability to influence. Second term, third term, the longer you're there, the more you have the ability to understand the system, use the system, get things passed. So people are putting gobs of money, and it's out-of-state money, it's special interest money, into the state of North Dakota, into our legislative races for a reason. And they're putting it in there because they want something back from those legislators. And what happens is we blocking out Main Street. We're blocking out a farmer, a rancher, a business owner, a flower shop owner, a lumberyard. We block those people out from the system because you can't raise that kind of money. So what do you have? You have a government that's the wealthy, the elite, or the chosen few, and that's just not good government.
Now, I want to, because the last time we talked about this, I did some thinking about why, like legislative races, why they're raising so much more money. And I don't know that it's odd. Obviously, there's big companies, there's political interests that give money to candidates, and there's always that chicken and the egg thing. Are they giving the money to the candidate because the candidate is already somebody that they think is good for their industry or good for their interests? Or is the candidate going to be good for their interests because they're giving him the money? I don't know that you could say. On a case-by-case basis, we'd probably have to go down, and I guess you and I might arrive at different answers. I don't know. We also have to remember we're in a state where the population's growing. We have more people in North Dakota, so that means that there's more money, I guess, available. Our state's been doing pretty well financially over the last couple of decades. We've seen a lot of growth there, but also I think the most important factor is it's easier to raise money than ever before. Back when you were running for governor, having a fundraiser or something meant you had to have like a physical event, or you had to send them something out in the mail. And there's still a lot of that kind of stuff going on. But today's candidates can also just post a link on Facebook for free, and people can give them lots and lots of money that way. And my argument, I understand the point that you're making, though, about being worried about, are people elected? Because I want somebody, if they're a teacher or they're, heck, in the guy who ran for Congress for the Democrats, a local guy here from Minot, Zach Racknerud, works at Target. He's not, I don't even think he's in management. So he's not like a big, and obviously he got creamed, and he didn't raise a lot of money by Congressman Kelly Armstrong. I guess my point is, I think it's still possible to win elections without raising a lot of money. Kevin Cramer won an election against Heidi Heitkamp. She outspent him 4 times over. But I am concerned about that. I don't know that term limits is the right solution, though. I wonder if it's because it's so hard and it's so subjective, right? Like one candidate that raises a lot of money, if it's $20, $30, $100 contributions from a lot of people, maybe that's okay, right? And maybe that's just a sign that candidate's really popular, as opposed to a candidate who maybe just has, a dozen or so big money contributions from political action committees. To me, my solution to that is let's get better at reporting campaign finances, which, by the way, whatever we do with term limits is something that we ought to do, because it's ridiculous that in a digital age, we're waiting months to get campaign finance reports. Some instances there's no reporting of spending. We could do a lot better. There's no reason why every candidate can't report every penny every week. We live in the age. Google Sheets is a thing that exists. Let's get on it. Let's do that. But to me, I say make that information available to voters. Certainly the voting record of these candidates, if they're incumbents, is available to voters. And let the voters decide. I mean, that's the fundamental thing I have against term limits is it's saying, well, the voters might keep voting for people who are just, in the thrall of this interest or that interest. So we have to create a law that's going to keep them from keeping to vote from those people. I don't know. I would rather the public get informed and let the public make the choice. Well,
and I agree with you, Rob. You make good points on a lot of this issue, but I would shift one piece. Let me respond in 2 ways. One is, does money buy elections? Sure, people win, with spending fewer dollars, et cetera.
It's a lot. We'll put it this way:
ideas,
it's a lot easier to win. It's a lot easier to win when you have money. We'll
Well,
put it that
and
way.
you look up at District 14 or whatever, 18 or whatever it was in their last legislative session, where gobs of money went in to defeat an existing legislative candidate. And you get something in the mail every single day. You get all this information. You're swamped with media. And finally you just give up. It's like, okay, I'm just going to vote for that person. So you can overwhelm the system with money. But the other thing is, spending the dollars in an election is one thing. And I agree with you 100%. We need better reporting. We need to know where the money's coming from. Let people make informed decisions about who they're voting for and who's supporting them. It's perfect. Here's my concern. If someone wants to run for the legislature and they say, gee, that last time around, Fred Smith spent $75,000, I could never do that, and I'm blocked out. So I don't even get in the arena. And that's what I worry about. Mentally, you're blocking people out and saying, shoot, I can't do it. I'd never be able to raise that much money. And by the way, I don't want to be beholden to the people who give you that money. So I'm not going to run. And that's, we need to have a complete, open, honest system so people can run. So you're not just running the system with a chosen few.
So draw the line for me from term limits as a policy to getting money out of politics, because I'm not sure I'm following. It seems to me that the interests that we're talking about that are donating all that money are still going to donate that money. They're still going to pick their candidate. That money's still going to get spent. It's just, I guess we're going to be changing candidates more often. How do you envision that fixing the problem?
Well, here's how I see it. I look at a trail. And to do this proper analysis, Rob, we'd have to go back and analyze legislative races, especially leadership races. And is that money coming from out of state? Is it coming from special interest groups and national political parties? Where's the dough coming from is the first question. But here's how I see it. If I'm going to donate money to a candidate, I might donate it to a candidate to say, gee, I really like them. I like their ideas. I want to support them. I might donate saying, gee, my brother-in-law, is running. I got to, give him some dough to get in there. Or I might say, this person is like aligned with me in certain ways. I'm a special interest group. I want to get some legislation passed. Maybe it's passed in other states and I want to get it, I'm getting it pushed around to all the states. I'm going to donate some money specifically to support something that's my special interest or my political gain or my personal philosophy. And so to do that, if you follow that trail, Rob, to do that, you have to be in long enough. You have to be sitting in that legislative seat long enough to work your way through the system, to be getting on the right committees, to be getting in the right leadership positions. That takes sessions and sessions and sessions, as you know. So it's a long-term investment that I'm making on this particular individual. And if I know they can't be there long-term, if it's going to take them 15 years to get to a point to where they're going to be able to get what I want done, and they can only be there 8 years or 6 years or 12, whatever, then I'm making a judgment of my return on investment. And my sense is some of those investments in legislative candidates would disappear because you don't have a long-term ability to get into a position of leadership where you can make something happen.
Do you, because we're talking a lot about, candidates getting money. And I think I referred to the argument that I'm about to make earlier, where it's always the chicken and the egg argument. Are you supporting the candidate because they're organically in favor of what whatever interest you are, or are they in favor of your interest because you gave them money? And I'm sure we could probably cite examples of both. For instance, I'm thinking of Senator Jessica Bell. She's a state senator, and she is very much in favor of, you look at her voting record, she's a very pro-coal lawmaker. And I'm picking on her here. Obviously not suggesting Senator Bell has done anything untoward at all. But I'm sure if we looked, and I haven't, but I'm sure if we looked at her campaign records, she would probably have a lot of money from coal interests or people who work in the coal industry, maybe political action committees that are associated with the coal industry. Now, are they supporting her? Is she supporting coal because she got money from them? Or is coal supporting her because hey, we're obviously in a political environment right now where things aren't so great for coal. They obviously want to elect leaders that see the policy issues the way they do. I think of that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think sometimes it's so hard. I think it's very easy to condemn money in politics sort of generically and say, oh, the fat cats are getting their way. But on the other hand, there's a democratic process, and there's nothing really wrong with spending your money to elect candidates that you think will do the right thing once in office, whether you're a coal executive or a teacher or a farmer or a lowly newspaper columnist.
Yeah, and that's true. And here's I believe in what you're saying, Rob. But here's how it worked for me when I was running for governor the first time. People said, "You're so far behind, I'm not going to donate to your campaign." Right? You can't win anyway, and I'm not going to do it. So then, in my re-election, they said, "You're so far ahead, you don't need my money, so I'm not going to donate to your campaign." Right? So that's that's how that worked for me.
That's a hell of a thing.
But here's the point, though. When I was running for governor, I was running against the sitting attorney general, who is a member of the Industrial Commission. So the Industrial Commission, of course, is centered on energy production and all that kind of stuff. So I would go to those organizations and try to raise money for my governor's campaign. And those folks in, say the League Night Council or something like that, they'd say, "No, we know your opponent. He's on the Industrial Commission right now. We know who he is, and we're going to donate money to his campaign because we know we don't want to offend him when he gets elected and then have him be upset with us for not giving the money." So it's this. You're right. It's a chicken and the egg. But do you give money to someone because they are aligned in philosophy, et cetera, or do you give money to a candidate because you're afraid of what they might position themselves to do if they get elected and you don't support them? And that's, it was a very difficult situation because my policies, in my opinion, were better. My philosophy was better. My way of direction, supporting small business, supporting energy, I thought was better than my opponents, but they were not going to donate money to me because they had a sitting attorney general who was trying to move up to governor. And by the way, he was way ahead in the polls, and they weren't about to risk giving some money to the opponent and then, having that person win, being in the governor's seat, and then having to go in hand and say, "Gee, we're sorry, we donated to your opponent."
Yeah, I completely, but I'm just having trouble, I guess, bridging the gap because between how term limits are going to necessarily fix that situation. Because again, I don't see it. What you're talking about are basically political impulses that I think probably exist in one form or another in every single political system out there, right? There's always going to be interests who want to get in and they want to have the squeeze, right? They want to be able to lean on the right people or to have the ear of the right person in government, whoever that person is. I don't think term limits changes anything. I think it maybe just changes who the most, which maybe is a good segue into one of the big arguments that I don't like about term limits is that it I think in a lot of ways it powers the bureaucracy. Politicians, love them or hate them, have they eventually have to, if they want to continue to hold an office, they have to appear on a ballot. And the thing is, if you term limit it, you're constantly creating lame ducks, right? The minute you win that second election for the House or for the governorship, you're immediately a lame duck. And I worry that especially in our state where the legislature, for instance, is so restrained. They only meet it's a part-time legislature. They only meet every 2 years. Now we're going to term limit them on top of that. Are we just empowering the bureaucracy? Or is it just because I still think people are going to try to influence government and they're still going to spend lots of money to try to influence government. I think the only thing we may be changing is the people who are getting influenced are the people who never appear on the ballot because they're hired, not elected.
Yeah, and I think one of the things to consider here, Rob, is the power of an incumbency. When I was in office, one thing I noticed is the longer I was in office, the less connected I was with the constituency. You get farther away from them. People treat you differently. They react to you differently. They don't speak to you necessarily completely, when you're carrying around this big title. And so the longer I was there, every year I was there, I felt less connected to the people who I was supposed to be representing. And so what happened, look at our legislature today in North Dakota. You mentioned, their work being done today. In my opinion, they've been there so long that the focus is me getting reelected. The focus is my ideas. The focus is my philosophy. It's not representing the people. It's not saying this is what the people's going for. It's like, we're the legislators and this is what we think is best for the state. And so we've shifted the philosophy of the legislators and the legislative body away from representing people to special interests, to individual ideas, to keeping, reelection, et cetera. When I ran for governor, the second time around, say my reelection, the power of the incumbency, Rob, is incredible. I mean, I can have the state resources, I can be in the news every single day for something that I'm doing. The opponent, has to fight to get some kind of attention. They have to raise the money. They have to raise the money against, in our case, a popular reelection. Which is hard to do, and so you are maneuvering the system to stay in there, and the longer you maneuver the system to stay in there, the less opportunity you have to represent the people. And if we're going to have a representative form of government, I think you need to stay close to the people. I think it was a huge mistake in North Dakota to go to 4-year terms for House members. I think, being in the campaign, being out there, talking to people, asking them for their vote, that's how you shape government, not sitting in your desk and saying, oh my gosh, I got a bunch of money, I'm going to put in ads here, and then I'm going to go in and represent what I think is this government should do. I don't like that approach for government.
I'm actually counting, because it's interesting that you mentioned that about lawmakers being in office too long. I don't know. We actually have a lot of turnover. Now, what I have in front of me right here, and I wish I could assure, because I guess I didn't think that this was going to come up. Maybe I should have thought it was going to come up. But I actually have an email. This was put together by Legislative Council. And they went back and they just counted up the lawmakers who didn't return for each session. So in the 2021 session, there were 17 lawmakers who were in the previous session who didn't return for this session. I should say 14. The year before that, there were 17. After 2017, that big election, there were over nearly 40 lawmakers who didn't return. So that's going back, and I have this going all the way back. It looks like to 2001, and I've just been trying to kind of count while we're on air, but I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at some of those numbers. It's actually surprising. The number of people. Now, we do have some examples of people who have been there for a long, long time. Representative Bob Martinson, Republican from Bismarck, State Senator Ray Holmberg, a Republican from Grand Forks. But I don't know. I'm looking at this. I'm not really seeing the entrenchment that you're talking about. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of lawmakers who, and maybe I need to go back further and look at more years, but as I'm scrolling back here, it seems year after year we're seeing a lot of turnover, and maybe that's not surprising in a citizen-led legislature. I mean, the number of people who can make the sort of sacrifice that takes to serve in a part-time legislature year after year after year is pretty few and far between. So maybe I need to actually write a column about that and do all the math. But just at first blush, what I'm looking at, it's there's quite a bit of turnover in the legislature.
There is. And and I don't know what the right number is. Should half of it turn over? Yeah. When you had a system where the representatives were elected every 2 years and the senators are elected every 4 years, you had this constant campaigning, you had a constant interaction with the people and the voters and the constituents. Now when we do this every 4-year deal, you don't. And the House has always been the one that should be reactive. It should be close to the people. It should be the developing the policies based on what people are asking for in their government and out there, staying close to the people. Then it flips over to the Senate. The Senate is longer term, sage advice, experienced, etc.
Sure.
And the system really works. It doesn't work today. It just doesn't work today. And I'm concerned about that. And I think you're right about the legislature and the incumbency and, X number of X percent being turned over. But think about elected officials. I mean, I'm coming at it from the executive branch, right? Think about our statewide elected officials. How many are reelected? How many incumbent statewide elected officials in North Dakota can stay there as long as they want?
Yeah. Well, that's,
Republican or Democrat.
Yeah, we have Secretary of State Al Jagger, who's been there since the mid 90s. 94? I think was the first year he was elected. No, he's not 92. Okay, so he's not running this year. He's finishing out his final term. But Wayne Stenhjem, our Attorney General, has been in office since 2000. We don't know yet if he's going to run for another term. So you're right there. But the thing about what we're debating, the issue on the ballot, is term limits wouldn't apply to those gentlemen. They would only apply to the governor, which I thought was a really odd choice for the people who drafted this. And there's some politics behind this where if you look at some of the personnel who are, the chairman is Bastiat Caucus organizer Jared Hendricks. You have Bastiat Caucus lawmakers who are on the sponsoring committee, most of whom have actually served longer than 8 years in the legislature. So I don't know. I feel like if they had strong convictions about that, maybe they should resign and make room for someone else to take over. But I thought that was an odd choice, that they only made the term limits in this measure that they're circulating for signatures right now, that it's only for the governor and for the legislature and not anybody else. Why do you think they would have made that choice?
Well, I'm glad we're shifting the conversation, because we've been talking generically about term limits, and I've appreciated the discussion. But now, if we shift over to the specific ballot measure that's there for term limits, it does seem like this isn't appropriate. It doesn't seem like it solves any kind of a particular problem. If I have a concern about the longevity of people and the money in the system, this doesn't solve it. That's my concern about this piece of legislation. Why the governor and not other elected officials? Why just grandfathering in all the legislators that are there now? Those kinds of things. So you look at it and say, it's specific. It's vindictive. It's just, we don't like the governor, we're going to get the governor out.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate thing of the Bastiat Caucus. The Bastiat Caucus, I think you have some good conservative ideas. They've got some good direction. I think they have some good government philosophy, but they don't have any credibility because they're individually vindictive, and they go and they censure people if they don't like them the way they vote. They try to boot them out. They talk recall positions if they don't like the way they vote. They're going to term limit the governor if they don't like the governor. It's not a philosophical public policy direction. It is specific to the needs and desires and wants of the Bastiat Caucus, and that's just not the way our government should work.
Well, that was the point I was trying to make. Is it seemed like by singling out the governor and singling out the legislature, this was less about term limits as the philosophy, which is, I think, the thing we've just spent the last 20 minutes or so debating. This is about revenge against Governor Burgum, because the Bastiat Caucus doesn't like Governor Burgum, and the larger legislature who voted to expel Luke Simons. When I saw who it was that was going to be bringing this particular ballot measure that they're collecting signatures for, that's immediately where my mind went, is this isn't about term limits, this is revenge. Is that what you were thinking too?
Yeah, it is. It just looks too suspiciously focused. and I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't, nobody asked me to help with the draft. But I was. If you look at it from the outside in, if you look at it from an arm's length basis, you say these are the conditions of the ballot measure. Why would they do that? well, what public policy does it serve to limit the governor to 2 terms? What specific problem do we have with governors? We've had, 2 governors serve 12 years. We've had, most governors serve 8 years, some 4. I mean,
you go back to the progressive era. You could measure some of the governors in months. But
yeah, exactly.
That's a kind of a wild time in state history.
If you look at a ballot measure, wouldn't you think that if I'm going to vote for something, I'd like it to solve a problem?
Yeah.
So tell me what the problem is with the governor serving more than 2 terms. I could have served a 3rd term, a 4th term. Nancy and I talked about a lot. Do you do again? And a lot of the pressures, a lot of the momentum, a lot of the things, a lot of the desire is just to keep you going, keep you into the next term, keep you going. I don't think it would have been a bad thing if I would have been able to be elected and Nancy and I could have served a 3rd term. I don't think that's awful. On the other hand, we chose not to.
If I could have voted back then, I would have voted for you for a 3rd term.
Yeah, thanks. That's telling me how old I am. but the reality is, what specific problem is the governor caused if he were to choose to run for a 3rd term? What is the problem? What's the issue? If you're asking me to vote for something, you tell me what I'm trying to solve. You tell me what I'm trying to fix. You're trying to tell me what I'm going to do better. And what is it? I don't see it. I don't see a problem with open elections for our governor.
Yeah. And
letting the people decide. So it makes me suspicious, Rob. It makes me go, why, if you can't articulate a problem and this is how you're going to fix it, why would I vote for it?
So Bridge, because we spent the first, you kind of articulating a very strong case for the idea of term limits, but you're against this specific ballot measure. Am I understanding that right? And can you explain why? Yeah,
I wouldn't vote for it. For a couple of reasons. One is, I don't think it solves the problem. I don't know that there is a problem. So if I just saying it's a group of people who have some legislative philosophy and is vindictive against those who didn't vote for them or didn't like them or don't like their personalities or don't like their budget philosophy, whatever the case may be, we don't put things on the ballot to be vindictive against someone else. And I think that, like I said, the Bastiat caucus, I think, has some good ideas. I like some of their philosophy and direction for government, but they don't have any credibility because they push against people who may have a different idea or a different direction that you have. So if I look at this particular ballot measure, and like I said, I wasn't there when they drafted it, but if I look at the language that's going to be on the ballot, I say, okay, you're going to limit the governor. Great. What's his problem? What's the problem with having a governor serve longer? Tell me the problem. I might be able to vote for it. You limit legislators. Tell me the problem with legislators. No, you just want to get people in there you don't like and stay in there now because you didn't grandfather anybody. It's just the mechanics of the way it was put together, to me, doesn't say, here's a problem, here's what we want to solve, and that's why I want you to vote for it. And if that's the case, then I get suspicious about it and I have to vote no.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And the other thing, I just can't get around the idea that, fundamental to our notion of representative government, right? Every time I call it a democracy, I have we don't live in a democracy, people right. Yelling at me. A Republican form of government is a form of democracy. Democracy can take a lot of different forms. Ours, the American system of government, both at the federal and state level, is a form of democracy because ultimately it's about the will of the people. How we get there is just different than maybe how they do in like Great Britain, where they have a parliamentary system, which is also a form of democracy. Anyway, but fundamental to that notion is the idea that it's the will of the people, right? We hold an election to say this person or this person, this issue, yes or no. We have those elections and the people express themselves, and then based on those election results, we govern until the next election. I have a problem with the idea that if people just like an incumbent, right? Like we make this automatic assumption that if a governor runs for a 3rd term, that's just automatically a bad thing. I I have a problem with that. Now maybe, I mean, there's people out there who didn't vote for Doug Burgum. So they're going to think that a third term for Doug Burgum is a bad idea, right? Because they just, philosophically, they don't like the guy. And hey, that's fine. It's America. We have different opinions about, what's the right, policy direction for our state. But that's a different thing than like there's something inherently untoward about a governor seeking a third term, or a member of the state House of Representatives seeking a third term in office, or a fourth term, or a fifth term, as the case may be. There comes a point where maybe you and I could look at a specific lawmaker or a specific governor and say, gosh, we never should have elected that guy in the first place. We definitely shouldn't give him a third term. But that's just our political opinion. If the majority of our fellow citizens disagree with us and say, no, I'd like that person in there for another term, who are we to say that they can't make that decision, right? If the candidate's willing to run and the candidate's qualified and everything's legal there, and the voters want to vote for that candidate and that candidate gets elected, to me, that's democracy. And if your argument is, well, the people aren't paying close enough attention, or they're being bamboozled by this, that, or the other thing, well, then there are other solutions to address that. I just don't see where term limits addresses. I don't see where denying people a choice at the ballot box fixes that problem.
Yeah, you make good points. I agree. On the other hand, if you look at, say, the majority of states in the governors, I always thought it was kind of cool that North Dakota didn't have term limits.
Yeah. I think it's kind of cool. We do a lot of things differently. I think it's cool we don't have voter registration. I think we do a lot of cool things.
Yes, but most states do have term limits for governors. Why is that? Was there a specific problem that they tried to fix that we never had in North Dakota? Whatever. I go like we should shape the government for the people and by the people. But if there's a particular problem, maybe they were trying to fix it. We don't have it in North Dakota, which is my problem with the particular legislation being proposed, by the Bastiat folks. So what problem are you trying to fix? Somewhere there was a problem. People thought it was a big enough problem. They wanted to fix it. So they put term limits in on the governor's office. We're there to solve problems. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. But I think the idea, the power of the incumbency is sometimes gets into the way of continual election of sitting people. And sometimes that power of the incumbency, Rob, is corrupt, as you know. Sometimes it's, it brings money in that it shouldn't. Sometimes money is spent that shouldn't be spent. Sometimes directions are pushed that aren't appropriate.
Yeah, well, to illustrate that, there was a guy who ran in a judicial race this last cycle. I wrote a story about him. He was running, I forget which judicial district, but I think he was out of Bismarck. It was one of the central judicial districts, and he was originally from Ohio, from Cleveland. Oh, yeah. And had been admonished because he changed his name. He changed his name. I forget what office he was even running for, but he changed his name on the ballot to some, I guess what was kind of a famous political family or a political name in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. Changed his name basically to try to just get in on name recognition. Just be like, oh, there's Johnson. We always vote for Johnson. Vote for that guy, right? I mean, that sort of stuff is real, and it's depressing in politics. It's depressing to think that many people are just voting for a name and not considering, well, who is this person? Allow me to, I'm going to illuminate myself about this person. No, I recognize the name. I'm going to vote for that guy. That sort of stuff sucks, and it exists, and it's a real thing, and so what you're talking about. But I think you make a really good point. Where's the problem in North Dakota? Because you're right. You're right. We can look at a lot of other states have term limits, and that's right. And I don't know the history in all those states. I don't know why term limits came to be there. But I'm willing to wait in North Dakota until we have a problem, because North Dakota is a unique place. North Dakota, a statewide candidate, if they work really hard, can get in the same room with the majority of the electorate, or maybe not the majority, but one big whopping percentage of the electorate can get in a room with them at least one day during the campaign, right? I mean, we are a medium-sized city in the size of a state. We're very, very small. I think our politicians are still very accessible. I have this great story. I used to work for a conservative journalism nonprofit called the Franklin Center. And one time, it was back when Jack Dalrymple was governor, and I was writing a story. I think it was something about the budget in the legislature or something. And I sent it into my editor. My editor came back and said, "Port, you need a source for this quote from the governor." I said, "What do you mean a source?" I quoted the governor. Like, what do you mean a source? And they're like, "Well, where did you get the quote from?" I said, "Well, I called him on the phone." They're like, you just called the governor on the phone and he answered?" I said, "Well, I had to talk to somebody first, but yeah, I called the governor. I talked to him on the phone. He told me this, that, and the other thing about the budget, right?" That's the place we still live in. And maybe we don't need term limits yet. Maybe we could still let the North Dakotans decide. And maybe in the future, if we have a problem, then maybe term limits are something worth considering.
Well, it's wonderful connection with the voters and the constituents in North Dakota, as you pointed out. And I've been a recipient of it. Nancy's been a recipient of it. You get all over the state, you meet everybody, you can talk to everybody. But, in doing that, you shape the government because you're hearing people, what they want, what they like, what they don't like. You've got to be out there with the people. You can't be sitting back running advertising. You have to, in my opinion, you don't govern by polling. You govern by the heart. You govern by being connected with people, listening to them, hearing them, what their problems are, what their joys are. That's how you shape our government. And we can do that in North Dakota still. And that's just a wonderful thing about serving in our state.
That you make such an important point, too, because one, during the 2016 election, I was very, very critical of Doug Burgum. And the genesis for a lot, and I like him as a governor. I think overall, I'm sure you and I could come up with a list of quibbles and criticisms as we could with any governor. I think overall he's been doing a good job. But when he was running for election, I hated his campaign. I have to wonder if he liked his campaign, honestly. And the thing I didn't like is that he went out and he hired one of these national DC-based or, some Beltway group or consultants. And they came in and they're just like, we're just going to run these TV ads and we're going to do these mailings nonstop. And we're just going to overwhelm everybody. And I thought that was, it made me upset. First of all, because I didn't think it was, I thought a lot of it was just nonsense, just poll-tested pablum. But the other thing that drove me nuts is that I think Doug Burgum is a much more interesting person. Like Doug Burgum, the actual person who was born in North Dakota, who's a North Dakota patriot, who loves this state, who has been so wildly successful, he could probably be living on his own island somewhere if he really wanted to be, but instead chooses to live here and chooses to continue to be engaged in our politics and in trying to make our state better the best way he can. I think that is so much more interesting than the version of Doug Burgum that was represented by that campaign, by the political mercenaries he went out and hired to run it. Authenticity matters so much in North Dakota. Now, it worked for him, and he won, but I think he would have won anyway. I think he was a great candidate. If he had chosen to be authentic, I think he probably could have come out of that 2016 election with fewer burned bridges than he did. But I that's so important, and I think candidates. I mean, A, obviously, who stand for the right policies, because that matters. But B, candidates who are just authentic and just talk to North Dakotans and are just honest with them, even when they have failings or problems or whatever. If they're just honest, that still counts for so much in North Dakota, and that's the sort of thing I want to keep front and center.
Well, and I think it should be front and center, and I think that's one of the magic things that happened in Doug Burgum's original governor's election is he went out, he hired the big gun from Chicago, cut the legs off from underneath your opponent type of guy, and really positioned a lot of things that, in my opinion, weren't really issues that North Dakotans cared for or were worried about. But that's where he started. But I tell you one thing, when Doug Burgum got out on the campaign trail, when he started traveling around North Dakota, visiting with people, he fell in love with the people of North Dakota.
That's what I imagine. Well, I think he was already in love.
That's what it's all about.
I think he was already in love with them. I think he just got introduced to the people of North Dakota. There's no question in my mind.
Well, you saw a change in him from being mechanical, run for governor, this is what you do, blah, 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 to saying, gosh, these are what the people are, and these who they are, and what they want to do, and where to go. And, he just, like you said, he was connected with them. He discovered them, and he fell in love with the people of North Dakota. And that was just, a tremendous boost for his campaign.
So let's switch a little bit. We've talked about the philosophy of term limits. We've talked about the specific policy of term limits as it's proposed in this ballot measure. What about the politics we touched on it a little bit, but the politics that's motivating it, and we've talked about this a little bit, where you have this faction of the North Dakota Republican Party that is not small. You know, they're still very much in the minority. I would say probably about the 2-1, judging by using the legislature perhaps as a reflection of the broader public. They're in about the 2-1 minority in the state. But the Bastiat caucus, if we believe, they won't release who their members are, but you know, if they are to be believed, is a larger caucus than the North Dakota Democratic Party, and they're out there. They're angry. They're pushing. I mean, we have a recall ballot, and we have a recall measure for Governor Burgum. We have a recall measure for State Representative Dwight Kiefert. We have. I've heard word that there may be other recall measures coming for politicians. We saw this spring where a lot of sitting Republican lawmakers were censured. That's the political environment that this term limits ballot measure is coming out of. How do Republicans find unity again in this situation? And that's obviously the 24th. What was that old game show? Is it $24,000 pyramid or 48? I forget what it is. That's the
$24,000 question.
Is that what it is? Okay, $24,000.
Yeah.
Which doesn't seem like that much. I mean, that's still a lot of money, but that just seems like small potatoes now. When we're debating $1 trillion budget packages in Washington D.C. How do we? I mean, that's obviously the question at the National is how do we find unity again? How does the North Dakota Republican Party, as an elder statesman of the party, how do we find unity again?
Well, in my opinion, we as a party have to start articulating what Republican values are. If you look at the factions, the Bastiats, if you look at the general direction of the legislature, the party, the governor, whatever the case may be, we've really gotten into the system, Rob, of here's what I want, here's what I believe, here's what I'm going to do, and if you don't vote with me, then I'm going to attack you, kind of thing. And we need to get back to say, this is what I stand for as a philosophy. This is what I wear on my sleeve as what I stand for. I'm not always going to vote that way. I'm not always going to vote for what you want, what I want, whatever the case may be. I'm going to vote for this philosophy because I think this philosophy is what's best for the people of North Dakota. And I believe if the Republicans can start articulating what the philosophy of the Republican is, how it affects the governance of our state, and how it can help improve people's lives, the economy, jobs, and careers in North Dakota, then I think you start bringing people in. You're always going to have some factions within any party that disagree, that are extreme on one side or the other, or that carry a personal vendetta, whatever the case may be. But if on the whole, if you can identify your values, articulate your values, and instill your values in the political system, that's what people vote for. Not the individuals up there waving a sword. So I think personally, our party, my Republican Party, which was nothing when I got started, I think the party has to go back to saying, this is who we are, this is what we stand for, this is what we believe in, and instill that philosophy in our candidates. I got to tell you, when I was in office, there's a huge shift from the politics of getting elected to the politics of performance, of getting the job done. And you know what? If you're going to represent all the people, sometimes it may be against your own personal philosophy. Sometimes it just might be there. But if I know what I'm carrying is a Republican philosophy and I've got it on my sleeve, then it's going to be incorporated into my decision-making process. It's going to be incorporated into my thought and my patterns. But it's not going to be the demanding answer to it. The people are the demanding answer. They're the ones that we serve. They're the ones that should shape the policy. And hopefully they accept the articulated philosophy of your party and where it's going.
That's such a good point, because I was referencing, earlier this spring, I think we saw 8, 9, 10 Republican lawmakers censured and they're at their district reorganization meetings by their own party. But part of because they were actually circulating, the Bastiats were circulating a scorecard of bills, right? Like, that's a lot of different groups do scorecards where they pick certain votes and then they rank lawmakers based on how how they vote. And some of the like one of them was an abortion. I think I bring this up all the time because I think it's just such a great example of what the problem is. It was a pro-life bill. It was introduced by State Representative Jeff Hoverson, who is my representative as it happens, from Minot here. And it would have made abortion a felony, and it even would have made it a felony for anybody who assists a woman in getting an abortion. So like if it's so broadly written that if a woman called an Uber driver to give her a ride to the abortion clinic, the Uber driver is guilty of a felony. Now, people who are pro-life, right? I'm pro-life. I know you're pro-life. People who are pro-life can look at that bill and say, boy, this is not good policy. This is not the right way to address this issue. And yet here we have Republican lawmakers being censured because they weren't willing to go. I think that's exactly what you're talking about, is instead of saying, listen, we're all generally pro-life and we're going to have a debate about the many paths that we all think is the best way to get to pro-life, and we're going to try to, I mean, I realize that's as messy as a bowl of spaghetti, but it's also kind of the way you have to do it, because if you try to say my one path is the one way and everybody who's not on this path is a rhino and they're not a real conservative, that's a good way to shrink your political movement down into nothing. And that's not what I want. I feel like Republicans have done such a good job because there's been a pragmatism, exactly what you just talked about. Sometimes you've had to diverge, right? You have to listen to the people. You have to understand what they want. And you just have to try to govern responsibly. Even if that means I am not going to be a perfect ideological paragon on every single issue. Sometimes I'm going to have to compromise because my point of view just isn't the majority point of view, but yet we still have a responsibility to the people to make decisions and to budget and do all the other things that government has to do. I keep calling this the just plow the damn roads coalition, right? Because I'm kind of tired of the culture war. Like I just want, right? Like what's the appropriate amount of money to spend on snowplows? Let's have that debate. Where do we, right? We've had this debate. You watch the legislature, they debate stuff like this, right? How many snowplow stations should the transportation department have around the state? Should it be here? Should it be over there? Let's have that debate. Let's find an appropriate money, and let's just make sure the roads are plowed so that our North Dakota citizens can get to the road. And I don't really care, what the ideology is of whoever's going to work with me on it to achieve that goal. And then once we got that done, check it off the list and we'll move down to the next thing. But I am so interested. It just seems theatrics. Like it's all my team versus your team. And we got to stop looking at it. Like we have a state to govern. And we want kids to be educated, and we want roads to be plowed, and we want communities to be safe. And that's all we really have to do. All that other stuff, your culture and what TV show you like and what flags you like to fly outside of your house, that's all your stuff. Do that stuff on your own time. That's what I want. And maybe that's Pollyannish or naive of me to think that America in 2021 is ever going to be like that. But, boy, that's what I'd like to get to.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. So sign me up. I want to sign the petition.
Yeah. I'm also anti-petition, so I'm not sure if I'm going to start a petition. I'm not really. And by the way, Rob Port's not actually starting a new political party. By the way, I'm not going to start the plow the damn roads policy. Although I think it would make for an interesting platform, and I'm trying to think of what my flag would look like, but I don't know.
Big snowplow, yeah. It looks good.
Yeah.
But which could have a lot of connotation to the way we legislate these days. But you're right. We get and back to the issue of certain groups of people censuring legislators because they didn't vote the right way or this and that. The thing you can't do is you can't abandon your principles for stupidity. So the piece of legislation is out there like the pro-life bill that normally we'd hope to support, but it's got stupid things in it. You can't just say, oh, well, I'll support it because of the title. I mean, you support a piece of legislation or not because of the content that's in there. And sometimes that content sounds good on the title. As we know in North Dakota, we've seen it, in a lot of things. And you get down into the content of what's there, and it doesn't have anything to do with the title, or it causes some consequences that just aren't appropriate or even legal in a lot of cases. So, that you can't just stand on your political philosophy and say this is only it. I carry my political philosophy. It's in my heart, but I use that to craft and shape public policy, which includes the public, by the way, and it includes the opponents, by the way. If you shape good public policy, you include everybody in the conversation and come to a conclusion that's what's right for the people or the majority of the people and move forward that way.
You know, people ask me all the time because because of what I do for a living, and because I feel like I'm good at it. It engenders a lot of reaction, and a lot of it most of the time. In my line of work, people usually don't call you up when you're doing a good job, right? Like they're not like, "Oh, that was a really good comment." It happens sometimes, but most of the feedback you get is when you tick somebody off, and now they're going to let you know about it. And so, you know, people ask me like, "How do you put up with that?" You know, and one thing that I learned early on is that if you go into politics and policy debates with the idea that there's some goal line that you're going to get across and you're going to win, right? And then everybody's going to agree with you and you won, and that never happens. There's always another election. There are no perfect victories and there are no permanent victories in politics. So if you're coming in and your idea of a perfect legislature is one that governs exactly the way you want every single time and there's never any compromise on any issues, if that's your goal, you are going to be disappointed because the world just doesn't work that way. It's never going to work that way. The most we can hope for is some level of consensus that we can all live with, right? That's really what we're going for. And
yeah, it's one of the things that I learned, and I could give you a long example, but one of the things that I learned early on in sitting in the governor's chair is that somebody might have a totally different idea than yours. It doesn't make it wrong. You know, they grew up a certain way, they feel so, they've had certain experiences, they're educated, they're studious, they're prayerful. They come to a position of where they are for very honest and meaningful ways. That doesn't mean they're wrong. It means it's different than mine. It's a different way. My experiences are different than theirs. My philosophy might be different than theirs. But if you go into these meetings or directions or policy developments and say, well, that person's wrong and I'm right and I have to win and you're wrong and you're a bad guy and I'm a good guy. It doesn't work, Rob. You have to understand that other people are honest and caring and understandably different. That doesn't make them bad. Yeah. But how do you incorporate what they believe? How do you incorporate what you believe? How do you incorporate for the common good, for the public good? That's what you have to shape public policy for.
Yeah, I don't want to convert my neighbor to conservatism. Right. I just want to solve the problem. I think conservatism is generally the right philosophy for government. And I want to have a debate about my neighbor, but then I just mostly want my neighbor to go live their lives, right? I want everybody to have as much room as possible to just live their lives the way they want to live them. Now, because we live next to each other, we have intersections in our interests, and at those intersections, we're going to need some public policy to, have a code. Can he play his music at 4:00 in the morning when I'm trying to sleep? No, maybe not. Hey, my tree fell across his yard. What happens there? We need laws. We need things to policies in place to govern that stuff, and that's. In the end of the day, that's all we really need. But we're veering way off here into the philosophical for a debate that started about, or a discussion that started about term limits. So, Ed, any last thoughts before we wrap things up?
No, thank you, Robert. I appreciate the conversations. I hope people listen to these conversations, hear about it, but importantly, take time to consider what we've been talking about, because it's as we shape government, as you shape public policy, as you move forward, it's really the common good, the common benefit, and that might be different from your neighbors. And I can understand why your neighbor doesn't like you, Rob. but
hey,
but the point is, each piece of that makes the whole work, and you just can't automatically reject something. Incorporate it into the conversation, incorporate it into the policy direction. That's how you shape a government by the people and for the people. So I want to thank everybody that's listening today and ask them to carry on these conversations at home and in the community, because this is where we shape our government and this is where we get things back on track.
Ed, thanks for your time.
Thank you.